Hello and welcome to this UCL Lunch Hour lecture on mental health in the workplace. What's possible in an impossible world? My name is Siobhan Morris and I'm Assistant Director of Grand Challenges here at UCL, and it's my pleasure to be chairing today's lecture. World Mental Health Day is marked annually on the 10th of October, and this year Workplace Health is running a campaign that aligns under the Healthy Mind theme of being well at UCL. This year's theme is Promote, Prevent, Support, prioritising mental health in the workplace. And to coincide with this, UCL's Grand Challenge of Mental Health and Wellbeing and Workplace Health have collaborated to bring together a series of lunch hour lectures on a range of topics relating to mental health and some of the challenges that are faced across the mental health landscape. These talks embody the whole university approach towards mental health support outlined in the recently agreed UCL mental health principles. And these principles are the next strategic step to creating a healthy culture for both staff and students here at UCL. Today is the second talk in this series, and I am delighted that we are joined by three fantastic speakers today. So Professor Jo Billings and Professor Ros Shafran will kick us off, and then we will hear from Alexandra Gunhill. So Jo is Professor of Psychological Trauma at Workplace Mental Health at UCL, and Ros is Professor of Translational Psychology at UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. And Alex works in UCL's Workplace Health team. Thank you all for making time to share your expertise today. Very much looking forward to your lecture. Before we begin, a couple of small housekeeping announcements. Even though we are online, we still have a couple of housekeepings to do. We will have some time at the end of the lecture for questions, and these can be submitted at any point during the talk by going to Slido. Just enter it into your internet browser and pop in the event code. So please do post and engage via Slido, and we will have some time after the presentation to answer your questions. So with that, I will now hand over to Jo and Ros for their talk and their slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking today. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that will be accessible to everyone. Yeah, it really is a pleasure to be here today talking about this topic, which is very close to my heart, thinking about mental health in the workplace. So starting up then, why on earth does it matter about mental health in the workplace? Well, we actually spend about 90,000 hours of our lives in an average working career at work. That's about 10 solid years we spend working. That's in an average lifespan to about 79 years of age from working from 18. And that's a huge amount of time that we spend at work. Interestingly, I found another statistic here, which is in the average lifespan, career lifespan of a typical employee in the UK will have 6 office romances and 812 workplace arguments. So lots going on at work for us all. But now work-related stress has actually overtaken musculoskeletal issues and colds and flu as the main reason for people having sickness absences in the workplace. And that's at an estimated cost of about £5 billion to the UK economy every single year. And in just 2023, 17.1 million working days were lost related to work-related stress. So work and mental health are invariably a reciprocal relationship. We bring our mental health to work. So how we're feeling outside of work, we'll be bringing that to work, but also how our work impacts us and how we experience the workplace is very much going to impact and shape our mental health. So we know that about 300,000 people in the UK who have long-term mental health problems will lose their jobs. They'll lose employment every year. So that's a huge number of people. And we know that about 15% of people at work in the UK have symptoms of an existing diagnosable mental health condition. According to a survey in 2020 of about 1,800 employees in the UK, nearly 80% of UK workers reported that they commonly experience work-related stress. Interestingly, that was about 20% higher than findings in 2018. Perhaps not hugely surprising around the pandemic. It'll be interesting to see whether those numbers have come back down or they've stayed as high as they were at that time of the pandemic. Most commonly reported reasons for stress at work are around office politics, negative work environments, interdepartmental communications or problems with those, tensions with colleagues, senior members of staff, managers, long working hours, and poor company culture. Workers are also reporting, according to the findings of this survey, very high rates of stress outside of work. Nearly half of workers reporting family-related stress and over a third reporting stress outside of work due to their relationships. This is costing employees a huge amount, but it's also costing employers a lot, a huge cost both from sickness rates, but also presenteeism, people being at work, but not really functioning optimally, and huge rates of staff turnover. So are we really working in an impossible world these days? In this post-pandemic context, I think we're all trying to work in a very challenging environment. We're trying to work remotely and in person, which has fantastic opportunities for flexibility, but it can also be quite stressful trying to work across two different forums at the same time. We're also seeing, because of that, these blurred boundaries between work and home life. We often don't separate work and home life in the way that we used to by commuting into the office. We're often spending more and more hours working at home, and increased workloads associated with that. And I don't know about you and anyone else listening to this talk today, but we seem to be in a culture of prolific meetings. I know during the pandemic, we tended to meet a lot more and try and stay in touch, lots more Zoom and Teams meetings. That just seems to have continued post-pandemic. Part of the pandemic legacy is the amount of meetings that we seem to still all have to attend to now. And we're all trying to balance family stresses, family life, and our work, which, as I said, is particularly challenging now when we're working more from home and working more than ever. We've also seen in the last couple of years an increase in the cost of living. We've also seen Brexit, a huge amount of global unrest, which is impacting staff, recruitment, retention, relationships with funders, relationships with colleagues internationally, and putting a huge pressure on all of us in the workplace. And I grabbed this earlier because I thought this was fantastic. Words said by no academic ever, which certainly I could relate to, and I'm sure several of you listening to today can as well. So why does mental health in the workplace matter in academia then? So we know that people spend up to 10 years of their working, their lives at work, but actually academics tend to work much longer hours than average. In a study from a couple of years ago, academics are routinely working 50+ hour weeks, and actually nearly 10% of academics are working 60-hour+ weeks every week on a routine basis. We're also working with a student population that's experiencing increased stress, anxiety, and depression, and that's making associated demands on professional services staff as well as academics. We're also potentially in academia researching topics that might be emotionally or ethically quite challenging. We might be working on mental health research, climate change, socio-political issues. So quite often even the content of our research can be quite emotionally or ethically challenging for us. And we're trying to work in a world, in a career with extreme precarity, typically short-term contracts, short-term funding, constant pressure to generate income, to get grants and to get fellowships, and a real publish or perish culture. I find it quite unique that people who are at the absolute top of their game, experts in their fields, have to constantly try and generate income to maintain their job, or possibly even keep applying for jobs to use their expertise. I don't know if any of you follow on Twitter or Facebook a fantastic site called Shit That Academics Say, but I thought this really captured for me some of the challenges that it's like when you work in academia, that if you don't work in this setting, you probably really wouldn't get. So for those of you that remember Jurassic Park, you might remember back to this scene and think, you know what, he was offering 3 years of funding. I get why they got in that hill. So thinking about mental health in academia, we know that good work is good for your mental health. And actually, academia offers so many positives and so many benefits to us in the workplace. We tend to have fantastic degree of autonomy, flexibility, and creativity. We tended to come into academia because we're working on things that we really care about, things that really matter to us, and how we work and how we fill our time and the things we choose to follow. We do normally have some degree of autonomy over. We tend to have quite a bit of variety in an academic career, student-facing roles, teaching, support, academic work. We tend to be able to have quite a varied and flexible daily routine. We tend to be able to work in teams and to be able to link up with colleagues, network, make collaborations, but we also have a fantastic balance of being able to work quite autonomously as well. And for most of us, I think we find our work quite meaningful. And we work with other people who are either working on the same research areas as us, and we share that same purpose and meaning in that work, or even just working with other academics or working with other professional services staff in an academic setting. We tend to have that shared sense of purpose around education and research. But with those pros come some cons, and with that flexibility and autonomy can come some real pressures and some real challenges. These are some more pieces of evidence that I found. There was actually a study conducted earlier this year that was published in the Times Higher Education supplement that talked about how this scholarly autonomy, this sense that we have that we can work autonomously and that we're working on the things that we're passionate about, that are our kind of personal interests that we're actually doing for work, can actually be used to justify breaches of weekly work hour caps. And actually put a huge amount of pressure on the well-being and mental health of academics. And I liked a couple of these quotes as well about what it really is like to work in academia, what it's like to work in this setting. So we conducted some research here at UCL in the last couple of years, looking at the experiences of academics working across the higher education system across the whole of the UK. And I just wanted to capture some of the quotes about particular areas where we really need to think about how we progress and how we really try to work more on improving areas for academics' mental health and well-being. One of the things that came out of this qualitative study was this ongoing lack of diversity, the fact that we still in an academic workplace, as much as we try hard to increase diversity and accessibility in academia, we still have a very quite stereotyped workforce. So this assistant professor in this piece of research talked about how visibility is important, the need to have female professors, ethnic minority professors, openly gay professors, and people from all different sorts of academia so that they could be more visible in terms of creating role models and for budding academics and early career researchers to aspire to. We also need to be thinking more about leadership and how we actually change culture at a senior management level and actually even with funders. The assistant professor in this quote talked about having that feeling that people higher up are not actually listening. And even if you say that there's poor well-being amongst staff, they'll do something like put on an online course, which you then have to try and find 2 hours to do, but you don't have the time to do that because you're already overworked. So really needing to think about making system-wide changes to make academia a place that's more supportive and conducive to academics' well-being, and really thinking about funders, thinking about things like, how viable is it to have the best people in the country working constantly on short-term contracts, constantly having to secure new funding, new grants and new fellowships? So how can we really think about that at a career level to make changes at a more broader systems level context? And again, addressing those system-wide challenges, I thought this was a fantastic quote from an associate professor who talked about really needing to fix the system and all these solutions for mental health. It's often really kind of laying them at the individual's door to take responsibility for having better mental health and well-being. But actually, if we made those system-wide changes, if we gave people permanent contracts, we made people feel valued, we made people's academic careers more secure, then people's well-being and mental health would be much better. So these are some of the challenges that we're thinking about really at an organisational and systemic level. And I know Ros is going to talk a little bit more shortly about working kind of at an individual level. But really, these are some of the steps that we're trying to take. So we have at UCL signed up to the University Mental Health Charter. We have set up a University Mental Health Charter oversight group, with the intention being to not just pay attention to student mental health and wellbeing, but actually to pay much greater attention to the mental health and wellbeing of staff at UCL. We've also set up a staff mental health and wellbeing expert working group, which I co-chair with my colleague Anna Cox, which provides advice and consultation to the University Mental Health Charter Oversight Group. So if anyone listening today who's particularly interested in that work and perhaps contributing to that expert working group, please do feel free to get in touch. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So based off of the work that we're doing in that space and working in collaboration with UCL Workplace Wellbeing, we've been trying to undertake some initiatives at that wider organisational and system level. So for example, Alex and colleagues have been working on a training course for line managers to help line managers be more aware of mental health issues in their employees, and really just trying to increase awareness of an understanding of mental health across the whole university-wide system. We also now have the UCL Grand Challenge of Mental Health and Wellbeing, which Siobhan mentioned earlier, which she directs, which is really trying to channel research and fund and support research in this space. And then last but by no means least, we do have our UCL Workplace Wellbeing team, and I think Alex is going to come back at the end and talk a little bit about what is available to staff there. But I hope that's some food for thought, and that sets the context for Ros to talk a little bit more about what we can do as individuals, as people working in higher education, the academic sector, to really think about how we manage our mental health and wellbeing in this space.
Thank you, Jo. So I'm going to request remote control that I can control your screen. Thank you. So I'm Ros Chaperon, and as Jo has said, there are lots of challenges when it comes to thinking about mental health, and lots of system-wide challenges. But one of the things that's perhaps the easiest thing to do is to think about what we can do for ourselves. And some of what you were talking about, Jo, thinking about the title of this, impossibility. So sometimes the expectations on us are just impossible to fulfill. And sometimes we make it harder for ourselves in terms of our understanding of the task. And so what I'm going to be talking about is perfectionism. And I've done a fair amount of research into perfectionism and how you can address perfectionism. And trying to make a distinction between sort of functional high standards and unhealthy and unhelpful perfectionism. And perhaps the most relevant quote or sort of understanding of it is not just the standards. It's the standards being impossible or high or beyond reach or reason, but it's also really striving to attain those standards and striving all the time persistently towards these goals. And if you can't reach those goals, then interpreting that as a personal failure, so that somebody's self-worth is entirely viewed in terms of their productivity and accomplishment. So if you're an academic, then it's the next grant, and is it the big enough grant? Has it got the overheads that they want? Is it the right type of grant? And no matter how much you have, then there's sort of always more and more and more. And failure to get the grant isn't, oh, well, they're not, they couldn't see that it was such a great project, but it's, I didn't do it properly, I'm not worthy of it, and really being impacted severely. And if you're not an academic watching this, but you're at UCL and you're working in professional services, then it's always kind of thinking it's an impossible task, and it's an endless task, I think, working in professional services too. So how you do that and thinking, I'm never doing enough, I'm never doing it well enough, I'm not servicing enough people, and so on. And this is a video. You won't be able to hear the sound, but it's a TikTok, because actually, I think thinking of sometimes TikToks and YouTube have great materials, and they really encapsulate what it's about. It's a bit harder to work your screen. Let's try. So what it says is, it just saying to their friends, you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to be good. But when you're talking to yourself, I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect and good and doing everything efficiently and smiling with a happy face. And really that sort of just illustrates the double standards. It's fine for other people to be okay, but me, I have to do it perfectly all of the time. And sometimes when people think of perfectionists, they think of the kind of the driven academic achiever. I've got to achieve 110%. It's always got to be the best. Nothing but the best is good enough. But there are different types of perfectionism, and they're sometimes a bit less obvious. So sometimes it's people that perhaps are not progressing up the greasy pole of in their career ladder because they lack the confidence to try new things. So rather than try and fail, it's better not to try at all. So it's a kind of all or nothing avoidant approach. And you can see if you've got that kind of perfectionism, it's not obvious to other people, but you get very, very stuck. And with the volume of work that we all have to do, procrastination can be a major problem because it just builds up. So it's not like you're sitting there and relaxing, it just gets more and more and more and more and more worrying. But this paralysis sets in. I can't start, what shall I do? I'm overwhelmed, I've got this for them, I've got that for that, and I've got that, and I've got this, and I've got that. So you have all of these different taskmasters and all of these different roles and responsibilities, and just can become paralyzing if you don't know where to start, and you equally don't know how to finish one thing before you go on to another, or you're distracted because you're on your emails at the same time as watching a presentation because you've got so many things to do. For example, we've all done that. There's also the type of, it's got to be exactly this way. And that can cause challenges for your team too, in terms of workplace stress. If you're working with someone with perfectionism, or if you have a different kind of view on what needs to be, what is considered right or good enough to submit. So this kind of aggravated accuracy assessor where you're focused on exactness, it's got to be done again and again and again until it's right. And then there's the controlling image manager who wants to be perfect and regarded as perfect. So then not being able to tell your line manager, not being able to tell your colleagues that you can't cope because actually the fear that that would be a reflection on you. And these are not mutually exclusive, they're interchangeable, and people can have different forms and different types of perfectionism depending on the task. And people think often that it's just high standards and that the difference between the healthy perfectionism and unhealthy perfectionism is simply a matter of degree. Okay, illustrating it with the scale there, but actually they're really very different. So if somebody has healthy high standards, they can learn from their mistakes. Okay, that grant application didn't get funded, but that's maybe because actually, and this is a real example, I really stuck to the brief. There was an outline and I stuck to it in terms of it was a commission brief. And the feedback was that we had stuck too closely to the brief. Well, I was a bit disappointed by that, but I also learned that actually the next time a commission brief comes out, that actually you don't have to stick to it exactly. The uncertainty that comes, that Joe really clearly described, of not knowing where your next grant is coming from, not knowing where your next piece of work is coming from, not knowing where the deadline is coming from, not knowing what's going to be waiting in your emails first thing in the morning, being able to tolerate that. And being able to judge your achievements objectively and say, you know what, I had a lot to do. I couldn't do all of it. I did what I could, and actually, I did it in time for the meeting, and that was good enough. And you know, well done for at least getting it done. And fundamentally, that you are having goals that may be personally demanding, but they are achievable. And typically, this kind of healthy perfectionism is not in a domain that's unhealthy or unhelpful. So, for example, it could be, you know, in a sense, if someone has perfectionism in the domains of weight loss, so working with people with eating disorders, you can see how it can be a very unhealthy domain indeed. And the unhealthy kind of perfectionism is where the standards and the goals really are unrealistic. No matter how hard you work, 50+ hours a week would be an underestimate, really is not able to achieve those goals. And that if you don't get a grant, you react to it in a sort of catastrophic manner. Or if you make a mistake, you react to it in a, this is a disaster, I should have known better, I should have known that I shouldn't have stuck to the brief, even though they told me to stick to the brief. That's a failure on me as an academic. It's a failure of knowing the system and understanding it. I may as well not put in another grant because it's all going to be hopeless. And the uncertainty is highly aversive. So I think whenever a decision is due on anything, you might check your reviewers' comments if you're an academic. You might sort of see what's happened to the minutes of the meeting, all those kinds of things, because it's very difficult to tolerate the uncertainty and it preys on your mind the whole time. And this constant feeling of failure and not being good enough. And often it's in a very harmful domain in terms of health or in terms of other areas that can be very damaging. And that is the sort of difference between striving for high standards, which can be healthy. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with it, but when it becomes unhealthy, it takes on a really different flavor. What can be done? Well, you're going to hear a lot about the resources more generally for workplace mental health. And this is a website. Hopefully it will work. No, it doesn't work if you click on it. But if you search for overcomingperfectionism.com, you'll see that there are some strategies. And self-help is actually a really effective way to begin change. I think it's quite hard to know which self-help books to get. You go into a bookshop or you go online and it's just overwhelming. They all seem to have good reviews or various comments. But actually what you're looking for is one that's, I think, supported by research. And some of the techniques in here are things about understanding that the relationship between striving and achievement is not linear. So lots of people think the harder I work, the better I'll do. Hence the 50 plus hours. But actually, what we know is there comes a point in which it doesn't help you because you're tired, you're stressed, you're exhausted, you can't see the wood for the trees and what you're trying to do. You've changed that word backwards and forwards 1,000 times. And understanding that there is a point which it becomes either backfires or at least you don't get additional gain. And there's something called a zone of optimum performance to be working within, in which the effort you put in and the return that you get is optimal. And so this website, it's free. Everyone can just go on it and do those kinds of techniques. It's got that kind of myth-busting components, ways in which to try experimenting by what happens if you work a bit less, what happens if you don't check for mistakes, and being able to learn from all of those different situations. And also to be less self-critical, because fundamentally, the self-criticism, lots of people think it can be helpful and keep them on their toes and enhance performance, and actually the data show it really doesn't. So lots of techniques, and any questions you can always email me. And of course, this is just one of many resources, and I think Alex is going to talk about some other ones too. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you Roz, thank you Jo, they were brilliant presentations. My name is Alex Grunnell. I work as the Wellbeing Manager within Workplace Health's Wellbeing team here at UCL. And Workplace Health as a department, we're responsible for all things staff wellbeing related, so that includes postdoc and postgraduate researcher wellbeing as well. Roz, can I ask you to forward the slide, please, when you get a moment? I'm here just to tell you about, I guess for anybody who is feeling like they're struggling and would like to know about some of the resources that we have available for you here at UCL, I'm here to talk to you about a few of those today. So firstly, just to let you know about two types of peer support communities that we have here at UCL. First up are the Wellbeing Champions. We have a network of over 240 trained employees who can offer supportive conversations. They are also a local point of contact to liaise with everything that we as a department at Workplace Health are putting out there across the university relating to mental health and wellbeing. And if you are interested in having a conversation with any of the Wellbeing Champions, you can look for your local champion on the Workplace Health website in the Find Support tile. Perfect. So similarly to Wellbeing Champions, we also have a large network of mental health first aiders here at UCL, more than 400. And this is an employee network too, and they have been trained to offer support to staff who are going through a mental health crisis. And again, you can find your local mental health first aider on the Workplace Health website. If you look for the Find Support tab, you can see them there. If anybody on this call is also interested in becoming a mental health first aider or a wellbeing champion, you can find more details on how to sign up on our website. I think you can see the link just there, embedding wellbeing into your team and department. So if you take a look at that or reach out to myself or anyone in the wider team, we can give you more details about how to either access or train up personally. Okay, so I want to talk to you also about the EAP, so the Employee Assistance Programme that we offer here at UCL. Okay, so we offer this through a provider called Spectrum, and they offer various different kinds of support. So you can call them, and you can access in the moment, on demand, 24/7 support. You call up, you talk to a counsellor, a qualified counsellor. That service is also available for people who are deaf, people who are hard of hearing. There are other sorts of, if you head to the website, you can find out more information about how you can access that in whatever form is most accessible to you. In some instances, we can also offer up to 8 sessions of counselling that is suitable to clinical supervision. We can also offer a course of CBT, again, subject to clinical supervision. And Spectrum also offer a digital platform where you can access things like digital gym. They have 3 live classes a day. You can also access their kind of whole back catalogue of classes. They offer meditations, other articles and information about how to look after your own mental health and well-being, in addition to that on-demand support that you can access through them. I don't have a slide to talk to you about this, but I also just wanted to mention the possibility of referring into the occupational health team, which also falls within workplace health. Individuals or managers can refer into occupational health should you require additional support or adjustments as part of your role. And yeah, just to finish up, for anyone who would like more information about the support available, there's lots of information on the Workplace Health website, and please do also feel free to reach out to myself or anybody within the wellbeing team. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much, and for keeping to such excellent time. We have 20 minutes for questions. There's lots coming in on Slido already, and I'm sure I speak for everyone listening in who definitely could relate to a lot of what was discussed, whether that be workload or aspects of perfectionism. There is so much covered in there, which was incredibly helpful. So thank you all. I'm going to start with a question perhaps to you, Joe, in the first instance, if that's okay, around leadership. So it's come up in some of the comments and questions on Slido, but what's the role that leaders can play to address the kind of systems-wide challenges that you mentioned?
Thank you, Siobhan. That's an excellent question. I think it's really important for us all to think about how we lead and how we role model a way of working that's healthy and sustainable. I'm terribly guilty of this, and if any of my PhD students are listening on this call, I'm sorry. I think I'm being really helpful when I try and catch up at the weekends and send them the drafts of their papers so that they don't have to wait till the following week. And then when they tell me they're working at the weekend, I feel really guilty because I think I'm role modeling that to them. So do think as academics, we have a really careful balance to strike between making ourselves available. And often we do go that extra mile because we care about our students and we care about our work. But what's that communicating to people? How is that perpetuating a culture where that's how we all work? So first of all, the first thing, so I think we all have a responsibility in that space to think about our leadership behaviours. In terms of thinking about senior leaders and senior management in academia, I think, would it be fair to say there's a bit of a sense of, well, we did it, so you all have to do it? You know, we struggled to get the grants, you know, we've always worked those extra hours, it's just how it is. So I really encourage people in senior leadership positions to maybe just be curious and challenge that narrative sometimes, to maybe push back to funders about, why is a funding stream only available for a year? Why is there not more flexibility around things like maternity leave or paternity leave or additional leave? Why is there not more flexibility to work part-time? Why could we not have innovations such as, rather than having fixed-term researchers coming and working on a project and then them having to actively look for and gain other employment, why could we just not have a fantastic pool of permanent, brilliant researchers that we draw on to work on projects according to what we need, but also their areas of interest? Those people could be on permanent contracts in universities. They're good staff, we want to keep them. So I'd encourage leaders to just perhaps think a little bit more creatively. Think about, how could we be doing things differently? How could we be doing things better and not just doing things the way that we've always done them?
Thank you, Jo. Ros, if I may come to you next. There's a question around how can we balance the need for excellence? You know, we work in a Russell Group University with the well-being of staff, considering that these pressures can often perpetuate a culture of overwork and stress that you've all spoken about so eloquently so far. And in particular, Ros, you spoke as well about professional services as well as academics, sorry. And are there differences that you've observed in that?
Those are really good questions. And when we were developing the work on perfectionism, it was in Oxford. And I remember this conversation of, well, we don't want to have a definition of perfectionism that includes us, do we? Because there is that sort of, how do you keep your standards high and yet your mental well-being not deteriorate? But I genuinely think there isn't something about working smart, not hard. So there's something about, you know, that if you don't do any work at all, you're not going to do very well, but you really can overwork, and then you can take your work home with you and worry about your work. And there are some basic sorts of things that I think you can do to experiment about, how can you keep your standards, keep your productivity without actually just working more. And I would say, do not get a productivity app. That's one of the first things. I think that procrastinators get all these productivity apps. I don't know people that actually it really changes things. But I think I'll give you a very specific example of, let's say, this is a student who was writing a paper, and it was taking a really, really long time because it had to be exactly, you know, she wanted to read all of the papers that would go into it, etc. But the more papers that you read, then actually you're stuck with, oh, the word count for this is only 1,000 words, and I've read all of this, and it becomes overwhelming. So I think there's something about shared learning, working with colleagues, working with people that are efficient, and say, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to limit myself to X number of papers a priori and see what happens with the next paper or paragraph that I write. I'm going to compare that to how I'd usually do it. And I'm even going to compare it to when I open 4,000 or however many more kind of PDFs to do it. And just really get your own personal learning about where your zone of optimum performance is. And the reason that the intervention is successful is because it doesn't turn people into slobs. It doesn't mean people do less well. It just means that they achieve the same standards, but with less pain. Is it different for professional services and academics? Yes and no. Yes, because obviously the tasks are different. The expectations are different. The line management and some of the oversight is different. But the principle of being able to work smart, not rather than hard, the principle of experimenting with different ways of working and how that might work for you, and the principle of talking to your line manager if they're on site, or talking to your colleagues about how they manage and what they do, and acting as if, acting as if it's okay to do things differently and just see what happens. So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ros. If I may abuse my position as chair for a minute and ask a question which has not come in via Slido, and then I promise I will return to the Slido ones. I wanted to ask you both, Ros and Jo, about international comparisons, because obviously academia is global. And so I wondered about your own work in terms of mental health in the workplace, but also perfectionism that you've both touched on. Is the picture similar around the globe? And if not, what are other countries doing differently, other cultures perhaps approaching this in a different way? So any reflections you might be able to offer on that would be, I think, very interesting.
Want to go first, Jo?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Siobhan, and not one I know a huge amount. Most of the research I've done around mental health and wellbeing in the workplace in academia has been in the UK. But what I have seen in speaking to colleagues that work in this space internationally are very similar themes and trends, particularly in North America, in Australia and New Zealand. There's a real similar pressure on academics to secure grants, to get funding, to publish, to demonstrate that productivity that Ros was talking about, where kind of, more is more rather than less is more. We don't hear that in academia, do we? We don't hear less is more. It's like, well, 20 papers is better than 10 papers, or, getting £1 million of funding is better than getting £100,000 worth of funding. So I think we see similar issues globally. I think some other countries are facing additional challenges with what's going on in their socio-political landscapes at the moment. That is perhaps leading academics to be called to arms, so to speak, to respond even more. I know, for example, during the pandemic here, those of us that work in this space around workplace wellbeing were kind of felt like we were on the front line as well, working extraordinary hours trying to do the research and put together the evidence to support other people on the front line. So I do think it depends a little bit on the context of what's going on nationally. But with my experience, which is sort of mainly limited to the UK in terms of academia, from what I understand, there are similar challenges worldwide, but I'll be interested to hear what Ros has to say, particularly in terms of perfectionism.
No, I agree. I think there are similar challenges. I sit on the external advisory board of Flinders University, and I think my most consistent feedback is, how much do you expect one person to do? So the director's meant to be doing, not just bringing their usual body of research. Oh, and they have to do this, and they have to do that. And I see the job descriptions and I just think that's totally unrealistic. I mean, just because you've got a limited amount of funding doesn't mean that people can do more and more and more. So I think, and that is international, wherever those job descriptions are, I look at them and think that would be impossible to deliver. So I think, I do think there is that element of across the globe. But then I also think there's an element of the word comparison is really interesting, because that's a big problem in perfectionism. Looking at, somebody will always have more grants than you. Somebody will always rise up the greasy pole quicker than you. Somebody will always, be the favorite of the line manager other than you. And it's a skill to be able to recognize your own abilities and your own circumstances. So you might have family commitments, and it does mean, you have to stop when you have to stop, and that's okay. And just really, I think, trying to look, not always sort of an upward comparison of, everybody's better than me, or a downward one of, well, I'm doing that, but actually just being able to view your achievements objectively where you are, I think is, theoretically, it's hard to do, but it's a good idea if you can.
Thank you both. That's really interesting that there's a kind of clearly a contextual commonality around some of these problems across academia is definitely generating specific challenges and they're shared internationally. It's interesting. Alex, if I may come to you next. there's an interesting question in the Slido in the chat about microaggressions and how to deal with microaggressions in the workplace. So if you might be able to outline some of the resources available for staff at UCL on that issue.
Of course. It's quite a general question. I suppose it depends where it's coming from. I guess the first port of call would almost always be a conversation with your line manager. Now, obviously, if those microaggressions, are coming from your line manager, that may not be a space that you feel safe having that conversation in. I think any of those, any of the resources that I shared earlier, so be that the peer support networks, the EAP, they're all really useful tools for having those supportive conversations, for getting some advice potentially about where to take that next. Report and support as well is a really, really useful tool if it feels like it's something that can't be resolved, or that the person who is experiencing the microaggressions doesn't feel comfortable raising with their manager or escalating in that manner. And again, I would say here at Workplace Health, we're always more than happy to have a conversation about, to provide that support and to have a conversation about where we can progress any concerns of that kind.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And if anyone would like further details, please pop them in the Slido and we can respond there as well. Another question which has come in is around how does the pressure to excel in a predominantly white Western dominated discipline, the example that's given as clinical psychology, potentially contribute to perfectionism? So Ros, if I might come to you in this case, particularly it notes among Black, Asian, minority, ethnic students or staff that there might be an increased sense of becoming vulnerable to becoming quite self-critical as a result of feeling like in that predominantly white Western dominated space that they might feel like they need to outperform in order to succeed. And so I wondered if you might be able to speak, Ros, about any research or any particular evidence base which has looked at, are there clear differences among different protected characteristics, different population groups in this respect?
It's a really good question. And I think the second part, when you carried on, Siobhan, actually answered the first part, which is, how might it influence things in terms of being self-critical, feeling like you need to outperform. So I think that undoubtedly is true. And I'm not an expert in this area, and I don't know any research that speaks directly to it, but it makes sense to me. I mean, and the next sort of question is, okay, so I'm all for trying to change systems, but it's slow. So what can you as an individual do? You can use all the resources that Alex said. But if you're in that situation, I think, again, it's about looking for relevant resources. And I'm on the clinical psychology Facebook chat, and there was a question there about are there specific groups for people who for diversity, but also for people that are working class, because clinical psychology is also very middle and upper class, as well as being very white. And there are groups, so it's a recognized problem, and people have set up these groups to support each other. And I would certainly go to those groups. And being aware of the kind of the pressures and the specific pressures and what to do about them, and learning from other people is really, I think, the best way forward.
Thank you. And I guess that speaks to the point that Jerome, you made earlier as well, around the role of leadership in that space too, around setting cultures, setting expectations. We have a few minutes left, so I also wanted to pick up on a point you raised earlier, Joe, about the pandemic. And we've seen a dramatic, huge increase in the role of technology. We're all on Zoom and YouTube today. which obviously has brought a lot of benefits in terms of being able to stay connected during the pandemic you mentioned, but has also seen in many ways a large increase in workload. So I suppose it's a double-edged question, and you can each of you can perhaps take whichever side of the question you would like to answer around what benefits does technology bring to improving mental health in the workplace. Ros already mentioned her uncertainty, shall we say, about productivity apps. But are there particular apps or tech which can bring real benefit and be quite helpful in this space? Or also the converse of, have you seen a dramatic difference coming through in both the research, but also, you know, the lived experience, the numbers you're seeing through the door, the virtual door, workplace wellbeing, changing as we've moved more and more online? Joe, if I come to you first, and then, as I say, answer whichever part of that slightly rambling question you'd like to.
Thanks, Siobhan. I was just going to say, I'm going to go and delete all my productivity apps, and I think that's going to free up a whole bunch of time for me. Thank you for that, Ros. It really is a double-edged sword, isn't it? And COVID really accelerated the degree to which we connected with people in new ways. I've had more collaborations with people internationally than I had pre-COVID, because it's so normal now to have a Teams or a Zoom call. It just makes it more normal. You're not spending money traveling and time trying to get to meetings and things. There's some real benefits in terms of collaboration and accessibility. I think it has also made research and academia more accessible for people with different needs, and people who might have certain disabilities. It's made, you know, joining this lunch hour lecture today, you haven't had to travel into UCL and W1 to come and sit and listen to us. You can do this, you can do it so much more easily within the rest of your day. There is that double-edged sword, isn't there? And I remember at one point in the pandemic, I'd lost track of whether I'd kept up to date with my Zoom, my Teams, my Slack, I didn't even know which platform I was keeping on top of or speaking to people on. And what's been interesting is the benefit of that legacy of accessibility is still with us, but so is this culture of all these different forms of connection. And I don't know about my other people here or my fellow colleagues, but sometimes just that ability to turn off, to switch off and not be accessible, it's really hard. And maybe we feel we need to be accessible to our students and to our colleagues, and maybe our students feel that we need to be accessible to them. They're paying a large amount in tuition fees, they want to have that contact, but it's really, really hard to disconnect. So I don't know how we change that, but something about giving ourselves and our students permission to disconnect at times as well is almost as important as trying to connect with each other. I'm not sure I've answered the question, but some interesting thoughts about that.
Yeah, really good question. If I open my door, you would see open plan and nobody in it. And for me personally, that's a big disadvantage, that no people contact, no incidental contact, no, you come into work and you've got to try and book a room to do your Zoom call in. And that's a legacy of the pandemic. But I think it's a big question, but it's like social media. It's here. And is that so? Some aspects are positive, some aspects are not. And I think it will vary according to the individual, which parts are beneficial and which parts are not. And knowing that for yourself is part of the key. So I don't think there's a sort of a one size fits all sort of answer to that. And for me personally, it's going into open plan and eating lunch by myself because people aren't around.
Alex, have you seen significant changes?
Changes, yeah, I suppose echoing exactly what Joe and Ros have said, I think there are huge benefits to technology and the ability to connect with different people, but also different services. So, for example, to go back to the EAP service that we mentioned before, or any kind of, I suppose, if we're thinking about online meditations, online exercise platforms, things like that. And I guess accessibility in general, in terms of who can access these services from home or from wherever is most beneficial to them. But I think exactly what Ros said, it's about kind of choosing what does work for you rather than trying to keep up with everything. So simplifying it and thinking about where the limits need to be put in place. And I think a good technological kind of solution for that as well, when you think about things like social media, you can now you can now subscribe to apps that allow you to put timers on your use of these kind of tools, which, yeah, I guess at the very least kind of enable you to be a little bit more conscious about how much time you are spending using the tools, which can be good tools, but can also be a bit of a time drain.
Absolutely. And as you outlined, there's a whole range of support available online as well as in person for staff at UCL. Thank you to you all for such a fantastic lecture as we start to draw to a close. And thank you all for tuning in today and for the excellent questions in Slido. I'm pleased to say that quite a few of the questions will also, I'm sure, be addressed and be of interest for the next lecture in our series, which takes place on Thursday, 10th of October, which is focused on unequal mental health, society, power, and the depressogenic environment. So hopefully you can all tune in at 1 p.m. on Thursday for the next in our series. Thank you for attending today's lecture. It's been recorded, so you'll be able to reflect back as well. And if you would like to take part in the World Mental Health Day Workplace Health Campaign, or if you'd like to stay up to date on further information, links will also be sent to you after today's event. But hopefully you've all taken something away, that we can all have an afternoon where we work smart, not necessarily hard. And definitely I will be looking for that zone of optimal performance that was so wonderfully articulated earlier on. So Alex, Rose, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise and insights. Thank you.